Hello and welcome to Fresh Thinking by Snowden Optiro. My name's Tarrant Elkington, General Manager for Snowden Optiro. Today, I'm joined by Allan Earl, who's an executive consultant with us at Snowden Optiro. Allan has more than 40 years experience,
yeah.
although you wouldn't know it by looking at him, in the mining industry, from operations in both Australia and South Africa, as well as 25 years in consulting with Snowden Optiro. So welcome, Allan. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
The topic of our podcast today is around technical due diligence, and in particular, the mining aspects of that. And so this follows on from an earlier podcast that we had looking at the geological and mineral resource aspects of technical due diligence with Mike Andrew, and an earlier series on due diligence process with Mark Warren. So please go and check them out on Spotify or YouTube. But to get started with our podcast today, Allan, if we could just start, if you could tell me what, at a high level, technical due diligence is about for mining.
Tarrant, the most important is to identify the fatal flaws or the potential fatal flaws in the project that you're reviewing. After that would be to identify other material risks, their impact on the project, and potential mitigation that could reduce that risk. Then there would be to identify other issues around the project, which may not be a high risk, but still important for your client to understand, that will impact on the eventual operation that they're looking to purchase. Fourthly, material opportunities. So things that are perhaps not well presented in the selling document, that you can identify that the potential purchaser could get some additional value out of the project. I think finally, an important part of a technical due diligence is to present the findings in such a manner as a non-technical person can read and understand what you've written.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. You could do the best work in the world, but if you can't tell the story, then I think that's then you probably missed the whole point altogether.
Yes, yeah.
So I guess when you're starting out with the technical due diligence for mining, what are some of the things that you're initially looking for when you first start?
So firstly, I'd be looking for consistency in the mine plan. So as you read through the documents, you're being presented with the same information or the same story, perhaps in a different format, but it's all pointing in the same direction. And then you can assess, is the business plan reasonable, and is it consistent with the data and the information that's provided to you in the data room. I'd want to be checking the numbers. So certainly, do the ore reserve tables add up within reasonable limits of rounding? And is what I see in one section, perhaps the production schedule, is that then consistent with what I see in the financial model? And occasionally you do have differences. Mining studies can take quite a long time. Situations do change. So if going from perhaps the optimisation through to the final results, if something has changed, at least there is an understanding and an explanation of those differences.
Absolutely, that's excellent. So like, let's assume that you've gone through, we've checked the data, everything's consistent, or at least you've understood the differences, but we then dig into the technical detail. What are some of the things that you're looking for? And maybe because open pit and underground are quite different, maybe we'll start with underground and then we'll go to open pit.
Typically, I would start at the top of the pyramid, looking at the cash flow model, which from the mining study, basically two things that you're taking. You're taking the production tonnes, grade, and a processing schedule to generate revenues, And then there's also capital and operating costs. So I would look at that information first and then effectively work my way down to make sure that all the data and evidence supports those numbers, and that information and those plans are reasonable and sit within the technical limits of the study. So there is then compliance, and there's evidence that the information as it works up actually has some support, or where assumptions are made that I believe the assumptions to be reasonable or not.
And so, what are for an underground mine? What are some of the particular things that you'd be looking at?
Well, I said that I would start at the top. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up. So I would want to look at the resource models, the geology models, perhaps even read through the resource report, which might be something a little bit challenging for some mining engineers, but there is some useful information hidden away in there that you can glean. So I'd want to understand the model, the ore body geometry, the grade profile, the classification, and the presence of any major geological structures, oxidisation surfaces, etc., because they're all going to impact at some stage on how you design the mine, and then the mine schedules and production profiles that you generate. Step 2 would then be to look at some of the key studies that impact on the mine plan, and that would be geotechnical, hydrology. There may be environmental studies, limits on what and where you can mine and cannot mine. So it's important to understand all that and to make sure that's been complied with in the mine plan. The third step would be to then look at the mining study, things like cut-off grade, the application of stope optimisation, which has certainly become very popular in the last 10 years, the application of dilution and ore loss, whether or not the mining study does recognise the oxide, transitional fresh boundaries that are going to be present. I've seen on some occasions where stopes have extended up into the oxide areas where it's physically unable to mine practical stopes. So that's important. The next step would be to look at the consistency of the application of the modifying factors. In terms of modifying factors, I would include all the assessment criteria of Section 3 of Table 1 in JORC to give you some idea. So, and when you're doing the mining study, you need to consider a broad range of criteria, not only those within with strict mining engineering constraints. Then burrowing down, look in some detail at the stope layouts, the development layouts, and how that complies with good industry practice. Underground mines will have things like ventilation studies, power studies, pumping, and you need to make sure that addresses both the statutory requirements and the physical constraints, and there's enough allowance for power and costs in those items, which can be quite significant and add quite a lot to the overall cost. Then to look at the mine schedules, the productivity assumptions, and the actual production schedule itself, to say, well, does this really make sense? The way the mine has been, the rates that has been mined, and the sequence the mine is being extracted. And, to consider things like reducing pillars in high stress environments, which can become high risk issues. Then to look at the derivation of mining costs, how the unit costs have been built up, whether from first principles or perhaps contractor rates, and their application against the actual physicals to build up the cost model. Then to look at the ore reserve, where potential purchases, where this carries, a lot of weight. Make sure the numbers add up, and secondly, that the correct classifications have been carried through, and then the conversion from the resource classification across to the reserve classification. I've got a simple rule that if you're doing a feasibility study, for an underground at least, then measured resources don't get converted to proved ore reserves because there's simply no reconciliation information available. And if there are in an operation or even typically more in an operation, how the operations are dealing with inferred resources and blue sky or potential blue sky material for their internal planning, because quite often what's presented in a due diligence is the ore reserve plus additional material where the seller sees this as adding value to the operation. So you need to look at that and form some view of the reasonableness of including that in the mine plan.
So that's a pretty comprehensive list for an underground mine, but how does that differ for an open pit mine? What are anything that you're looking at that's different?
I think broadly the process is similar. With an open pit mine, I think there's a lot more weight on the optimisation process and stage selection, and that overall the mining strategy, because there are just a lot more tonnes being moved. And then that impacts on the surface layout. As you're looking at the stage designs, the waste dump progressions, and the other surface disturbances in and around the pit, they're the main differences that I would see over the sort of list of things I would look at for underground.
And I guess the underlying studies that you do, geotechnical, hydrological, hydrogeological, they're all needed, just in a different context, right?
You'll be looking at it in a different format, but the need to talk to the rest of the due diligence team to understand the resource, to understand the processing side, metallurgists, the ESG issues, the financial modelling are the same, whether it's open pit or underground.
Yeah, I think that's important. The mining review or the mine plan sits in the middle of everything, right? So you need to understand what's coming in and what's coming out as that driver of value.
So I think there's a lot of very useful information gained during a debrief each evening when the team gets back together again.
Absolutely. So when you're doing this DD, we talked about all the things that we'd review. For a typical DD, would you do work? Would you prepare an alternate plan or idea, or?
We have two, I guess, different types of clients. Some clients know exactly what they want done, and they will give you a very detailed prescriptive list of items that need to be reviewed and questions that need to be answered. And unless you identify something out of the ordinary, then there's probably no other work that you do other than addressing the questions and addressing perhaps other sort of high risk items that you may identify that haven't been weren't part of the original scope. But we often get asked to review projects by clients that don't have that detailed list, and rather, relying us as experts to review the project. And in that case, we do often get asked to develop our own case if we have concerns with the business models being presented to us, and it's quite common to be asked to present to the potential purchaser what might be what we could call is the base case, something we believe is reasonable and achievable, a best case, which may add in blue sky and perhaps take an optimistic view on commodity prices and operating and capital costs, and then a worst case. What would happen if the commodity prices are depressed, and what would that look like? And so quite often we have to do quite a lot of design scheduling work in a very short period of time.
Yeah, it can be quite a dynamic. There can be quite dynamic projects for us.
Yeah, and I think in most due diligence there's one overriding thing, and we're generally time poor.
Mm.
We don't have enough time to do everything that should be done. But I think the art of due diligence is identifying and be able to focus on the really important material issues, either risk or opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent point. If I was to ask you what the difference is for, say, doing a DD for an operating mine versus a development project, what sort of differences do you see in those?
Well, if we were to take an operating mine, I think going on the site visit, you can actually see what's happening, and the people on site own the plan, and they can explain their thought process for their life of mine plan. There's a heap of production data, historic production data, historic costs. So that allows you to see what's happened, and then form an opinion on the production schedules and costs that are forecast in the life of mine plan. There's generally a lot of data available, but in many cases the actual data room that you're looking at is probably overwhelmed by data, and it can be difficult to identify the right source of information, because some operations do take the opportunity for the data room just to be a data dump. In my mind, a data dump is not full disclosure. So that does make it quite difficult to sort of sift out, the right information that you want to that you need for the review in the time that you've got available.
Yeah, I think the irony of that situation is that development projects generally have a defined study
That's
for
right.
you to review, a cohesive set of documents, but the operation doesn't prepare those documents because they don't need to. They're an operation, so they don't prepare that full report for you to make it easy for us to assess. So you both get that additional data, and the lack of a cohesive story sometimes makes it harder for those operating mines.
Yeah, and then for a study, the advantages of a site visit for the mining team, there might be limited things to see. And while a site visit is still useful, you don't get as much out of the site visit as you would for an operating mine. Mm. I guess another challenge with studies is the project team may have moved on, or the study might be quite dated. So currently we're looking at studies that go back to pre-COVID days. And so the operating costs and the capital costs are significantly lower than you might expect in 2024 for exactly the same project. And so you have to make some judgment on how capital and operating costs will have escalated over that time. And you don't have that original project team to ask questions of, but they've moved on to other things.
Yeah, I think that's excellent point. I mean, the cost is such a dynamic space at the moment, and very difficult to you can't benchmark 2024 against before 2020 anymore. That's
and you don't have the time to to do a first principles estimate again. So you are really relying on a judgment call of what escalation should be applied. Perhaps relying more on sensitivity.
So that draws our podcast to a close for today. So for Allan, thank you very much for joining us on Fresh Thinking and participating in this discussion about technical due diligence for the mining aspects of those. If you'd like to listen to more Fresh Thinking by Snowden Optiro podcasts, you'll find them on our website, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and most other podcast platforms. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe to our YouTube channel so that we can keep you up to date with our technical podcasts.